Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Podcast, which doesn't have a name yet, with Damien Riehl and Horace Wu. Damien, hello.
Hello, I'm really thrilled to be doing this with you, Horace. We've said in the past that every conversation we have between us should be recorded because you say such smart things that I want to record it for posterity. So I'm really thrilled that we're doing this for real this time.
And I also say such dumb things, which my wife would like us to record forever as well. So I feel like this achieves both purposes. Now, both you and I were at ILTACon last week, and I think we both saw lots and lots of chatbots. And I think it's one of those funny things where it's a lagging indicator. I think a lot of people have moved on, but because it takes a while to produce products, people are still releasing chatbots as new features. I think chatbots is a really interesting form factor. It's like a gateway drug. It lets users very easily interact with these highly powerful models, but it really doesn't do very much. So I think a lot of conversations have been moved on to agentic AI. Now, I was watching a really interesting video yesterday with the founder of Google. I wish I knew who it was, or CEO of Google. It was a YouTube video I was watching in the background, so I don't know who was actually talking. And they said to the audience at Stanford University, can anyone describe to me what agentic AI is? Now, Damien, before I give away the answer, maybe I'll throw it to you. What are your thoughts on agentic AI? What is it, and why should we be paying attention to it?
So I think there's the Damien Riehl definition, which may vary from the industry definition. I think of agentic AI as any system that is able to take multiple steps, perhaps using a large language model, to be able to achieve its goal. So maybe step 1, 2, 3, through 10, through 20, et cetera. And then after those 20 steps, the goal is achieved. But what I think about it is that you could do that through a large language model, where essentially you have your business model agent, you have your marketing agent, you have your create a bank account agent, you have your legal research agent, and all of those kind of swarm and then get the work done. That is a large language model side. But you also have just a symbolic AI side. You could do everything I just described using good old-fashioned AI. You don't need any large language models. So I think that there's the idea of agentic AI is kind of a new spin on an old concept where you just say, I want to do things programmatically. Those programmatic things could just be if-then statements through kind of a good old-fashioned AI, or they could be agentic, more kind of dynamic agents in the large language model world. So I would say agentic AI is really anything where you take multiple steps to be able to get the end product out. What do you think?
You know, it's funny. As you describe that, my thinking is that is probably a better definition of agentic AI than how it's been described in the market. What's been described in the market really is agentic large language models, where a language model is capable of not just producing text, but taking actions. And so that definition of agentic AI is essentially you put in natural language and the agent or the language model returns to you some sort of executable code that a computer can run, and that's the action. That's where the agency comes in. And I think what's interesting about your definition is you included within that the implicit reasoning that the agent has to go through. Step 1, step 2, step 3, as well as taking the actions. And I think, like all things with large language model at the moment, it's the definition's in a state of flux. And one person's going to describe it one way, another person's going to describe it a different way. But ultimately, I think the magic of agentic AI right now is the idea that you can use very, very simple instructions to get a machine to do something far more complex and execute a complete sequence of steps. Did you see anything like that at ILTACon?
I saw, I'm building things like that. And I think that I want to build upon what you just said, too, that implicit reasoning. And one could argue that agentic AI could use both implicit reasoning or perhaps explicit reasoning, where you could imagine that's good old-fashioned AI is to say, if this thing is the case, then do that thing. That kind of if-then statement is explicit reasoning. The benefit of agentic AI with the large language models is you don't need that kind of explicit reasoning. You can have implicit reasoning, saying whatever you encounter, come up with a good idea to be able to solve the problem that you've just encountered. So this idea of good old-fashioned AI being explicit versus large language models being implicit, I think that's important. So I would say that to answer your question, I'm building a lot of explicit things, and those explicit things are things with, as a litigator, what did I do for every single complaint I received? I would say, what are the claims being alleged? What are the facts supporting those claims? What are the remedies being sought? What are legal research questions I should be doing? So each one of those things is explicit, but I do that for 100% of the claims that I need, 100% of the complaints I encounter. So if I do it for 100% of the times, do I really need that implicit agentic reasoning when as a lawyer, I do the same things every single time? So I would say that there are good reasons to be able to use explicit, good old-fashioned AI to connect together large language model, what we call tasks within the workflow. So I'm building a whole bunch of tasks that say, after you finish task 1, then move on to task 2, and then move on to task 3. And the important part of that is that sometimes task 2 has a prerequisite, that you have to do task 1 first before you move on to task 2, because otherwise task 2 doesn't have the context window you need. So anyway, so if you build this out explicitly, then you have the benefit over the implicit models, where the implicit models will get it wrong because they won't have task 1 as the context before they do task 2, but my explicit model actually has it better. So all that's a long answer to your question is that I'm not seeing a lot of agentic work within the legal tech space, but I'm not seeing a lot of agentic work within the implicit models, the LLM models, but I am seeing quite a bit of explicit tasks and that kind of workflows. What have you been seeing?
I think it's interesting. I think a lot of people are shifting the burden of creating these explicit workflows to the users themselves. So there's a couple of companies that have come out and they are explicitly letting people build workflows, like, for example, Gilo, which came out of Trevor Smith. I had a quick look at them while I was on the trade floor, and what was kind of striking to me was it reminded me a lot of the old no-code, low-code sort of tools. And instead of having logic boxes and condition gates, they have parts where you can put in prompts. And if you satisfy this, then you go to the next stage, and so on and so on. So it felt like, and this is a 3-minute demo when I was standing there, it felt like it was a use case where it allowed people to capture the knowledge in their minds into a fixed process and then make it repeatable, which was always the goal of low-code, no-code platforms.
Yeah, and I think that's really the primary deal, because we as builders of legal tech tools, what we're doing is trying to assist you in your tasks. You can imagine that there are generic ways to be able to do things. The example I gave, take a complaint, extract the claims, extract all the defenses, etc. That's something programmatic that everybody does. But then there is a customized aspect of it. So John Smith, who is this kind of lawyer, says, no, I analyze complaints in this kind of way. So really being able to say this is a one-size-fits-all kind of solution versus here's a customized solution that is bespoke for you. We as legal tech people have always had to be able to say pick one or the other, pick the general or pick the low-code solution. But I think the large language models are giving this the combination of be able to combine those. So you could say take my out-of-the-box workflow, and if you want to customize it with your particular way of doing things, do that too. So this really takes away the build versus buy question. Do I build it myself or do I buy the out of the box? You don't have to choose. You can take the out of the box and maybe tweak it to be able to do it in the exact bespoke way that I do it, but it's a variation on the generic theme.
So the challenge of that, I think, is the lack of control. In the old world where everything's heuristics, you can easily go, okay, condition is A, B, and C. If it's satisfied, then do 1, 2, and 3. In a large language model space, you don't have that level of control. So how do we as builders, how does the market address that potential concern, right? Like the last thing lawyers want is the same facts giving rise to two inconsistent outcomes.
Yeah, that's you come up with the great questions, and questions are always more fun than answers. So I would say that is the right question. There are deterministic programs and there are probabilistic programs. So large language models are probabilistic. So how do you figure out that probabilism and be able to still get consistent output with a probabilistic model? And one could imagine that you could be able to solve LLM problems with LLMs. So you could imagine if the user...
Can we really?
Perhaps, right? So one can imagine, so you take my out-of-the-box complaint workflow, and then I, as a user, say, no, this is exactly the way I do a complaint, I, John Smith, or Jane Smith. And then you can imagine a large language model looking over that workflow and perhaps saying, oh, Jane, maybe you want to think about tweaking it this way or the other way, because what you've actually done won't work very well. And then Jane Smith saying, oh, that's probably true. Maybe I do want to correct it in this way. Almost like, did you mean for Google? Did you mean this instead of that? And the user can say, oh, yes, actually, I did mean that. Or maybe, no, I didn't mean that. So giving the user the choice through large language models to be able to maybe improve upon their customization.
So you just hit upon a really interesting feature of prompting. And it's a feature I don't see a lot. And that is inserting a prompt that allows a large language model to critique the input and the opinion of the user so that it can possibly challenge them and get them better. I don't often see that. And I think it's one of those things that's not easy to insert into most workflows, but if you can insert it, it's extraordinarily helpful.
We actually are baking that into Vincent right now. So we found with users that they'll ask a question of Vincent, but it will actually be 3 questions. And so a pre-processing step is for Vincent to say, if actually you've asked questions 1, 2, and 3, and provide questions 1, 2, and 3 to the end user. And then the user can say, oh, yes, I want 1 and 3, or I want all 3, or no, just give me my original 1. Thank you very much. I don't want your others. But yeah, that's something that I think is probably the right way to do software these days, because if you had in the past asked questions 1, 2, 3 in a single prompt, you would get a diffuse kind of not really focused answer, where if you separate them into 3 separate questions, you get a much more focused answer.
So one of the things we try to do, and I don't know how many people in the market does this, is we try to infer as much information from the context as possible. You are the creator of the application, so you can actually infer a lot of context based on where the lawyer is, how they got there, or where the user is and how they got there. And so you can actually create totally different prompts and totally different coding depending on how someone got to the identical screen. And so for us, like being able to infer these kind of contextual information rather than giving 3 different outputs, I think we lean towards that methodology. Now, the downside, of course, is if you get it wrong, you look very, very silly. So pros and cons, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you hit upon, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, Arthur C. Clarke said, right? And so,
who said that? Do you remember?
I think it's Arthur C. Clarke, if I remember correctly. If not, I've just misattributed it to Arthur C. Clarke. But I would say that, so we as builders want our experiences to be magical in the eyes of the users. Of course, they don't want to see the person behind the curtain, which is you and me actually building, and all of the teams that we work with to be able to actually make it seem magical to the end user. But that, of course, is the goal. And being able to achieve that goal requires the context that you talked about earlier. I, as this kind of user, want to achieve this goal for this purpose. That is a user story that anyone who is building products knows that you have to have all 3 of those things. And of course, each of those things is a context. I, as this kind of user, want to achieve this goal for this purpose. And so this is I think that you and I and all the great builders, I don't know if we can put ourselves in that category, but I think the best builders I know
aspiring
builders are thinking of all 3 of those things. And to the extent we don't need to ask the user any of those 3 aspects, we don't ask the user. We just take it out of the context. And one of the aspects that we're doing that on our side is to be able to say, of course, everything stems from the complaint. So we are saying, what is this, a breach of contract claim and a patent infringement claim and a trade secret claim? If that's the case, I don't have to ask you what claims are involved. I say upload the complaint. We'll extract those claims for you. And now that's one fewer question I need to ask you to say to give you the best context.
It's really amazing. Like large language models have gotten us to the point where computers ostensibly understand what humans are really looking for. And we don't have to spend our time pre-programming every configuration and going, well, there's 1,000 different scenarios. Let's figure out like which path is the right path. You can literally throw a machine at it and it's going to find, with some degree of error, the approximate right path.
That's right, because it's read all the text in the world, ostensibly the entire internet, plus many, many, many books. So it knows how English works. It knows how a lot of the law works. It knows Wikipedia, so it knows a lot of the legal concepts that are in Wikipedia. It knows the disambiguation of, in the United Kingdom it's called this versus the United States is called that. So all of the things, like your most well-read, smartest person, it's read all those things. So so the large language model out of the box already knows a lot of these things.
I'm going to challenge the most well-read, smartest person. I would say it is the most well-read person. I'm not sure about the smartest person, but
Yes,
we can leave that debate for another day, I think.
yeah, it's true. And I think that there's my Daz Greenwood introduced me to the idea of duck coding. Duck code. Are you familiar with duck code?
No, I'm not. What is that?
Duck code is a bit of with large language models are a black box. So you know the inputs and you know the outputs, but you really don't know what's going on inside of it. And so really, but if the output looks like a duck and quacks like reasoning, doesn't really matter whether it's reasoning inside or thinking inside. If the output seems like it's reasoning and seems like it's thinking, and so so I would say that what's actually happening inside the black box matters less than the output, because I don't know what's going on inside Horace Wu's head right now.
Nope.
You could not be thinking. You could just be repeating
Nor
something
do
you
I.
heard. Right. You could well be just repeating something you heard a while ago and just parroting, just like a large language model is parroting. I don't know if you're thinking or not. What I do know is what's coming out of your mouth and what comes out of your pen and what comes out of your keyboard. I judge your thinking by that. So perhaps we should also think of judge our large language models in a similar way.
I think this is a really nice point for us to pivot to talking about ILTACON, which is the biggest event that I think in my calendar, at least, because I don't get to travel very much. But Damien, you get to travel a lot. You get to see all of the legal tech conferences. What was your impression of ILTACON this year?
I think it was more exciting than it has in many years gone by. Of course, we've had a pandemic that thwarted ILTACONs, for a few years there. And so I think we, for a couple of years, had coming back into its own during the 21, 22, 23, et cetera. But I think in 24, there's more excitement. And I think we have more people actually doing building than we have in the past. Before it was in years gone by, it's been the theater of the possible versus the theater maybe of the actual today. So I think that people are very excited and more excited. It's of course more crowded than it ever has been. More people were there. So anyway, I thought it was really a very fun and energetic ILTACON. What were you thinking?
Oh, very similar to you. What I found was the hardest part was getting everything done. You had this enormous campus at the Gaylord in Nashville, and to even get from one side to the other side takes about 20 minutes walking. So if you have the misfortune of booking two meetings on the opposite sides of the campus, you've just lost 20 minutes. And as you're walking, you'll probably bump into 20 people you know. And so it's both wonderful and terrible. I think I probably had at least 5 people that I can think of right now who I said, I will catch up with you. And I never emailed them. I'm still yet to do that, and I apologize everyone for not emailing you just yet. But I think it was a really high energy event, and a few people have said that to me already. And I think what was interesting, to your point about more people building and less kind of promises of the possible, I don't know if I agree with that. I think there was still a lot of people going out there going, hey, this is coming. It's not released yet, but it's going to be here any time now. Though I do think that's just the nature of trade shows.
I think that's right. Of course, Bob Ambrosi's podcast live event every Friday, they often talk about them being annoyed as journalists with the announcement of the announcement. That they're announcing that someday we're going to be releasing the thing, where in the past you actually announced the thing, but now we're just announcing that soon, someday, we'll have the thing. So this announcement of announcements, I think, is what you've described, and that is annoying.
One more layer, and we're going to have an inception moment here. You're going to go, Christopher Nolan directed this marketing campaign.
That's exactly right, yeah. And so I think, we've tried in my company to be able to say, no, this is something that you can have in your hands today. And I think that's the right way to do things. I think that announcing to announce is in poor form, and I think our customers and journalists deserve better.
I totally agree with you. I think we've been so caught up, and this is kind of betraying my view a little bit. We've been so caught up with the extra injection of cash into the legal tech market. So much VC capital, so much private equity capital, so much money just flowing all around, that I think the investors are demanding to see movement and action. And a lot of these announcements are driven by the fact that, we have to have an announcement every 3 months. We just have to stay in the top of the news. And I think it's like that story of the boy who cried wolf. It makes everything just a little bit less exciting when it's announced, because you're like, I don't know what this is. So I do lament that a little bit. But I think that's a small, really, really small smudge on the event.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk also about ILTACON's size, both size and as far as population and size as far as geographic area. For anyone who's been to the Gaylord in Nashville knows it's a massive space. That is, it's many football fields all together, and so the I've thought a lot about, which do I prefer, having this massive space where I don't have to walk outside like I did last year with Orlando, where I had to move in 100-degree heat, walking 20 minutes from venue 1 to venue 2. And
do you mean
by that
swim in 100-degree heat?
That's right, and just drenched in sweat, and then have to do the same thing going back. Of course, between that option 1, and option 2, being in this massive indoor complex that is called the Gaylord, I think I prefer option 2, despite it being so massive, and despite it being hitting 20 people along the way. So what are your thoughts on both the massive size of the venue that is Gaylord's, and then the massive population within that size?
Oh, Damien, I'm an indoors kind of guy. My wife and I call ourselves international shade hunters as we travel. So I think that was a no-brainer for me. But I do think the size of this year's event was enormous. I think there's like 4,300 attendees. I didn't realize there were 4,300 people in legal IT, in innovation and knowledge, and it's just growing and growing. I do know a lot of firms weren't able to attend this year, and I know that because I emailed them and they said, no, thank you, Horace. Now that may be because they don't want to catch up with me, maybe. But I do think there was sort of like this feeling of it's enormous, and I think it can be even bigger next year. I feel like it's one of those funny events where they're trying to juggle so many things, right? Like good education, good sessions, good networking, good events, good parties, good everything, and jamming that into 4.5 days is ambitious, and in the most part, I think they succeeded.
I think so too. I've always found that the things happening on stage aren't nearly as interesting as conversations I've had in the hallways and over lunch and that kind of thing. That's where the real work gets done. As you're walking from point A to point B, and you see 20 of the people and be able to have really good conversations. I think they've, in some strange way, the big, massive footprint makes those conversations more serendipitous and more likely to be able to run into someone But let's also think about contrast the massive ILTACON with some of the smaller smaller conferences that you and I have been to. For example, there's the RKM Inside Practice. There's the KM&I with Patrick, and also Legal Tech Hub conference that goes on. What are your thoughts on a massive ILTACON and Legal Week versus the smaller, more intimate conferences?
Oh, it's a hard one. I mean, I like them both for different reasons. ILTACON's one of those opportunities where you get to see people you wouldn't have otherwise seen. And for me, that's the core value. I didn't attend a single education session. I wanted to attend a few of them, but it just never worked out. Whereas I think for the smaller conferences, people go for the sessions, and they're dedicated networking breaks. They're dedicated opportunities to catch up for a drink. And I think for me, that each has its benefits. I think there's a place for both. And personally, I'm looking forward to all the stuff in New York, because those are the only events I can go to other than ILTACON. So Patrick and Nikki's events are going to be incredible later this year. I think it's going to be interesting as the market continues to evolve for events, because there's only so much budget for law firms and for corporates and for people to attend. And as that gets split between different events and different times, you kind of have to wonder, like, where do I spend my time? Where do I spend my time to get the best bang for buck, the best audience, the best networking, the best content, etc.? Like all markets, it will grow, it will split, it will consolidate, it will go through these cycles. And I think we are at a growth cycle right now. I think there are more events this year than there were previous years.
I think so too. And thinking about, why do people attend? One is for the networking, which we've talked about. Another is the content, which you and I have. Neither of us has been to many educational sessions, largely because of the networking aspect, where you run into 100 people and you have meetings back to back all day, every day. But let's talk a little bit about those educational sessions, because I think which of the conferences live or die will depend on those educational sessions, and will depend on the speakers that are presenting at those educational sessions. And as I've organized many conferences, you probably have too. There are two approaches to organizing conferences. Approach number one is you think of the speaker and ask the speaker, what would you like to speak about? And then the speaker says, oh, I think it's really interesting about X, Y, and Z. And then the speaker speaks about that. That's option one. Option two is not a speaker-centric, but is instead content-centric. To be able, and this is what ILTACON does, is to be able to say, here are the 50, 100, 300 topics that we want to do. If you are a speaker who is interested in any of these topics, talk to the session organizer and see if you might be a good fit for that topic. So that is a topic-centric view. I think that the topic-centric view is a bad idea for the same reason that when I was in college, one of the upperclassmen told me as a freshman, you don't take classes, you take professors. He said the best professor with the worst title of the class is going to be an amazing topic. But the best title of a class with a horrible professor is going to be a horrible class. So you want to focus on professors, not classes. So in the same way, I think that ILTACON and others should focus on speakers, because if it's a good speaker, you can take an awful topic and the good speaker will bring something good out of it.
So I'm going to respond by using two different points. First is I'm going to agree with you. I think that's right. I think my reasoning for why having topics rather than speakers is a bad idea is because you're putting the decision on what people are going to talk about in the hands of a centralized committee. And as large and as wonderful as a centralized committee is, it is not going to be as numerous and as in touch with what is on the cutting edge as the speakers themselves. So you're actually reducing the likelihood you're going to find interesting things to talk about, because you've now got a governing body to say, oh, we need to talk about topics A, B, and C. So very much like your professor example, but for a different reason. And the other point I wanted to make, I've actually forgotten. So we're going to bounce back to you, and I'll come back when I have something intelligent to say.
Yeah, no, I will agree with your. So in product, there's a saying that the user is not like me. That is, the user will come up with 25 different use cases that you as a developer and product person will never even thought that maybe this person would have done that. So the user is not like me brings in all sorts of use cases that now you can use to make your product better. So in the same way, you can imagine this committee within ILTACON or any other organizational committee. If you go with a topic-centric model, these are focused on largely large law firms, because those are mostly the ILTACON planning committee. And these are also probably fewer builders like you and me that are actually building the products used by large law firms. So one can imagine then the scope of what these large law firms pick as topics probably matter less to small law firms that are maybe attending ILTACON, maybe medium-sized law firms. And they may also be less cutting edge than you and I are building here. So anyway, so I'm going to agree with you to say, yes, the user is not like me. The user is not necessarily a large law firm. The user might be a mid-sized law firm or a small law firm, or the user might be a legal tech company that actually has the latest and greatest. That will be beneficial to the large law firms and beneficial for the medium and small law firms to hear that message. So I agree with you 100%.
There was one story last week which really stuck out to me, and I think you read it too, which is Bob Ambrosi's shiny objects metaphor. Now, among all of Bob's great writings, this to me was just a perfect representation of where the market is right now, which is, for those who haven't read it, the story goes, an alien object has landed in the middle of a 1930s town, or at least that's kind of how I remember it. And this shiny, metallic, egg-shaped object has attracted the fascination of everyone in the neighborhood, then everyone in town, everyone in the region, and everybody comes in wanting to know what that big shiny object is. Now, of course, nobody really knows what that big shiny object is, but then all of a sudden you have these AI experts who come in and tell you that, oh, it must be this, and this is how you use it. And then all of these shops open up selling you parts of the shiny object, photographs of the shiny object, etc., etc. And yet at no point does anyone really fully understand it. Now, I think what's interesting to me about that story is that does describe a lot of what's happening right now. Now, of course, there are pockets of people who do know what they're doing, but in terms of the hype, in terms of where we are, we go back to what you said earlier in the show, which is a Gartner hype cycle. We are in the trough of disillusionment. And I think if we split the market between top-tier law firms, mid-sized law firms, small law firms, in-house teams, and other bodies like government and so on, everyone's on a slightly different part of that curve. And I think for the big law players, they're very much at the bottom of the curve. They're trying to claw their way out at the moment. So Bob's story really resonated with me. Now, Damien, were there any stories last week or any kind of conversations last week that resonated with you in the same way?
I want to stick with Bob's metaphor because I think it's a brilliantly good metaphor. And so one can imagine taking this and being able to say, some of those experts, AI experts, have actually been inside the egg. And they can say, I've worked with the egg, and I've been able to say this is what inside of the egg it can do X, Y, and Z, but it can't do A, B, and C. So you can imagine there are those people, but then there are other people that are experts that have never been inside the egg, that have only said, well, this is what I've heard other experts say who have been inside the egg. So therefore, it can't do A, B, and C, and it can only do X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
So I would say that there are so many people that have never been inside the egg that are holding themselves out to be experts and not really knowing what the technology is capable of.
How do you think
that the other? Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask. Sorry to interrupt, but how would you go about separating the experts from the pretend experts?
Have you built using the egg? Have you built using large language models? If you have not built, then you haven't really pushed the bounds of what the egg can do, what the large language model can do. And nor are you able to see not only where it fails, but also where it's extremely good. So I think that's, if you think about an XY axis, one X-axis is have you actually built using the thing? The Y-axis is have you practiced law in the past? Because if you practiced law in the past, that goes to substantive law. What is the large language model able to help with these substantive tasks? And if you've actually built and you actually have done substantive tasks, you could be able to see what can be built that will help those substantive tasks. So it will make its way into that two-dimensional space. So I would say yes, that is the X and the Y axis. And then the third axis, that is the Z axis, is how does this affect the business of law? With the X and Y axis is substantive law, but the Z axis is the business of law. What does this do to the billable hour? Versus do we now move over to flat fees? And that Z axis, I think everyone is outside of the egg. No one knows what is going to happen next.
So I am going to park that thought for our next podcast because I read a really interesting post by Nikki Shaver, and I know the company that's doing this, that is doing the AI billable hour as a way to transition everybody from doing normal billable hours to something that's a little bit more, I would say, advanced.
Yes, I've read Nikki's article, and yes, that is a perfect place to be able to start the next podcast, to be able to think about business of law and how these substantive changes that we're seeing might be able to affect the business of law that we're seeing. So maybe parting shots as far as things that we should be thinking about going forward in the next week or so.
I say let's get rid of all the chatbots, everyone. It's probably too sweeping a statement, but let's start with getting rid of it, and then we can put it back where it makes sense.
Indeed. Death to the chatbot, long live the chatbot, along with all the other UI devices that we could be using. So, Horace, this has been great fun. Let's do it again maybe in a couple weeks.
Damien, likewise, looking forward to our next chat.